everyone. This is episode 2 of What the Fuck is Wrong with Us. I'm Arton Baleci, and I'm joined this week by horror and dark fantasy author Joseph Sale. How are you doing, Joe?
Not too bad. Thank you so much for having me on. Such a pleasure.
No, not at all. Thank you for coming on. So we've also been joined by a third guest. In case you are watching the video and may have noticed, I've got an apparition that's appeared behind me on the wall, which is quite fitting for the episode, I think. Maybe some sort of portal opened up to a parallel dimension, and Joe could speak more about that than I can. But, yeah, Joe, I just want to get into it. Tell everyone about who you are, what you do. You can do it better than I can.
Oh, it's funny you say that because I think authors are often terrible authorities on their own work and their own genre in a way. You sometimes have to take that step back and look at things with someone else's eyes. But for what it's worth, I am Joseph Sale. As Arton said, I'm a dark fantasy horror author. I'm all about supernatural stuff intersecting with our real world in interesting ways. And what is the real world? Well, that's a concept that we could talk about later, because I think it's more wibbly wobbly than people care to admit, and that's where the horror comes in. Hugely inspired by writers like Clive Barker, and a lot of independent authors as well. I actually read way more independent authors nowadays than I do traditional ones. Really excited to chat to you today. I guess if I had to say one thing about my bibliography, would be I'm the author of 3 series. So there's the Illuminad trilogy, there's the Book of Thrice Dead, which is my 6-book series, which is probably the one that most people have read or heard of me. And then I'm currently releasing with a publisher called Bloodbound Books, who are based in Arizona, fantastic publisher. Released some absolutely amazing horror, dark fantasy books. Worked with some really cool writers like Neil Gaiman and Christopher Triana, and I've had the good fortune to get a book deal with them, and I'm doing a series of books set in the Robert W. Chambers mythos of Carcosa. So that's sort of a smorgasbord of my books in a nutshell. But yeah.
I believe that your work spans even further than that as well. I think there's some epic poetry in there. I think you do some editing for people as well. You're a Renaissance man within the writing world.
Oh, that's very kind. Yeah, also an editor. I've edited some books that have gone on to win some fairly prestigious awards, which is like a real blessing. Worked with some amazing authors. I still do that editing work alongside the writing, and I also run workshops on story and story structure in particular. I'm sort of more of a developmental editor, I guess, than a proofreader. And yeah, I write epic poetry, and I have written a couple of non-fiction books on writing craft as well. So yeah, quite diverse. But I think that's the joy of being an indie author, is you don't have to be pigeonholed into one thing. You can sort of experiment, and it's surprising sometimes what people respond to. Like the epic poetry, you think, who reads that nowadays? But actually it got a really good response, and quite a few people took the plunge, even people who maybe would never normally read poetry. So it just goes to show taking the risk, putting something out there can sometimes really pay off.
Mm-hmm. And how did this all begin? Like, how did your writing begin? Where did your love for dark works sort of trickle into your life?
Yeah, there's always a moment, isn't there? Although having said that, I think my love of really dark stuff began at an indeterminate point, because I mean, my parents always used to joke that when I watched Thomas the Tank Engine, I was rooting for Diesel and the Truckers, and when I saw Snow White as a kid, I was completely intoxicated by the evil queen. And then obviously you can only imagine what watching The Empire Strikes Back did to my imagination as a kid, and seeing Darth Vader for the first time. I watched The Empire Strikes Back first, which is typical of the higgledy-piggledy way that I do things. But yes, I've always been interested in the darkness. I've always been interested in the villains, and I've always had this draw to it. So it's actually hard for me to identify one particular moment. But definitely there was a moment where I was interested in a lot of different things, forms of creative expression. At one point, I was very serious about trying to become an actor, and I did like a lot of intense drama courses and shows, and I was a member of the Bournemouth Shakespeare Players, and I was also heavily into sport, and I was into all these different things. But then there was a sort of moment where it really concretized for me that actually writing is what I want to do, and I have never looked back since that early point, really.
What
And
age were you when that was?
I think I'd say I was about 16, 17. I think at that moment I realized that drama was great, but I didn't want to do that for a living, and I was more interested in the words on the page than the performance of the words, if that makes sense. I became interested in what was behind the performance and wanting to rewrite the scripts and have leave my own mark in that way. So yeah, my love of sort of writing and language, if that doesn't sound too pretentious, sort of really was sparked, I think, partly by the drama. So I'm very grateful to it for that. But it evolved into something altogether very different. And then I started writing. I'd written poetry and I'd written bits and bobs of things, but at around 16, 17, I really seriously started writing novels. Basically, they were terrible, but I started writing them. So yeah, and then I've been writing novels ever since, really, as well as these other things.
Wow. So a long time in the game and fresh out the box into the darkness.
Yeah, straight into the darkness. Although again, there was a crossover point, and I can tell you exactly what it was, where everything that I wrote had a dark tinge to it, and I was very interested in Gothic fiction in particular. Like, really fell in love with the Gothic classics, The Castle of Otranto, Frankenstein, Dracula, some more obscure Gothic stuff as well. It helped that I studied Gothic as well at A level, so I, really into that stuff. But that didn't really translate into my fiction. But then there was a moment when I went to university. I would have been about 18, and I read Stephen King's The Stand for the first time. And I'm sure this was many people's sort of awakening point. But for me, The Stand was a really special book because it took a lot of the mythic grandeur of the High Gothic tales and translated that into a modern setting. And I think that although I'd read horror novels and I'd read fantasy novels before then, this was the first time really where those two streams were joined, like, the mythic grandeur of magic and the supernatural and fantasy, and like the modern world we live in today. And I couldn't put those two things together until I read The Stand, and that just changed everything, really. So whatever you say about Stephen King, it's a pretty special book for me and always will remain so. And that really sparked me writing what I consider to be my first sort of true novel, that is actually still in print today. So yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, Stephen King seems to get quite, I don't know, I get the sense that he gets a bit of a bad rap in the horror community. You could
I
probably say
feel,
more about this than me.
yeah, well, I don't know about that, but I think you're right. And I think maybe it's because there's a feeling of betrayal, because he sort of switched to writing thrillers at a certain point. And I don't know whether he's ever quite been forgiven for that.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's something else, but yeah, I think as well, a lot of people felt that The Dark Tower was too much of a mixed bag.
Right.
And we know from the George R.R. Martin situation, we know from many other situations, that when you get people to invest in this huge, big thing, and then, you don't quite deliver for them, feelings get hurt, it gets very personal. And that's unfair on the writers,
Mhm.
but I think it's true. And certainly I'm the same. I feel really burned by George R. R. Martin. Like, I almost hold him personally responsible. You know, it's like that's way unfair. He's like, you know, he's getting on. He's probably bored of writing in that world. He probably wants to do other things. Like, I get all of that logically, but in my heart, I'm like, you betrayed me. And you've left me hanging. You know, like, I'm waiting for my high five 13 years later, right? I'm still waiting. So there is I think maybe a resentment. I mean, some people say the Dark Tower's the best thing he's ever done, and it's a masterpiece and it's perfect. You know, I've met many people who think that as well, but I've probably met more people who say, you know, that it left them disappointed. And when you've read 7 chonking Stephen King books to get to that point, and it's understandable, you feel a little bit jaded about the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't say I've read the Dark Tower, but I did start to watch the film the other week. But it was like nine, half nine at night, and it was more of a kids' film than I thought it would be. It seemed quite aimed. It felt more like a family film than an adult film, and I was in the mood for
Mm.
something a bit meatier, so I left it. But yeah, that's my only experience of the story.
Yeah, it's almost a good film, that film, but I'm not sure. I actually saw it in the cinema. There's a hilarious story about what happened when I was at the cinema, but but it was yeah,
Please, please, you can't leave me like that.
oh, so like, it was dead in there. It was so dead, and me and my wife went to see it together. She wasn't my wife at that point, but long-term partner or whatever. And we're like, amazing. Like, the whole cinema is empty. We'll go, you know, right to the back, right in the middle, get the like prime seats. Maybe we'll even be a bit naughty and put our feet up on the back of the seats in front, you know. We get there and we realise there was one other couple who had had the same idea as us, only they'd taken the naughtiness one step further. And let's just say that she was on her knees before before I said, "Could you not?" And then they tidied themselves up, and we sat and watched a film very awkwardly for 90 minutes. And my
Yeah,
wife afterwards was like, "You actually said something to them midway through." I was like, "Wait, this is a public space. Like, a 15-year-old could walk in, like, who really wants to see Idris Elba in The Dark Tower, you know?"
you were doing a
So
public service.
I was doing a public service.
I think
Secretly, I was just jealous, really.
I think you've triggered an old memory for me. I went to watch. I think it was Saw 2, and weirdly, I told a story about Saw 2 on the last podcast. But
Spooky.
me me and my girlfriend at the time, we sat down, and again, the cinema was extremely quiet. It might have been Saw 1, but anyway, we sat down, and some guy sat right along the road from us, like quite far along.
Mm.
Um, And you know when it's that quiet and you're acutely aware of sort of what everyone around you is doing, because there were only maybe 3 other people in the cinema at the time before the film started. He was acting really, really oddly, um, sort of speaking to himself and moving around, and we were just sort of acutely aware of this strange man down the road from us. And as the film started, and people started to be subjected to all sorts of torture, he started to cheer.
Wow.
Um, yeah, he was basically sort of like rubbing his thighs and getting, he was
Oh
like,
no.
yes! Yeah, and me and my girlfriend swapped places so that she was further away than I was. But it just felt like that was going to be the end of our existence on the planet. You know, I was like, we've came to watch this sort of torture film, and this nutter with a knife is sat down the road from us, and he's going to, gut everybody.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it made it very, very atmospheric. Uh,
What an intense way to view a film like that. That's
yeah, it was
wow.
it was pretty out there. I don't know, maybe it was just a plant to make the film screen better, but that would be viral marketing way ahead of its time.
Way ahead. That's
So,
unsettling.
um, so you said that you pretty much, as long as you can remember, we're drawn to dark stories. So, I understand that the self-reflection element of this might not be possible, but I get the sense that you're a guy who's thought a lot about, I don't know, the philosophies of writing and storytelling and why we like the sort of things that we like. So why why do you think that so many people like dark things? You can talk about why you yourself are drawn to them, but like, what's your sense now of having been writing for, I don't know, the best part of 2 decades or something like that?
Yeah. I have a very, very controversial answer, if you're interested.
I'm very.
Um,
That's what we're here for.
that's what we're here for, a bit of spice. Well, my answer is that there has never been, nor ever will be, a more perfect metaphor for the human condition than the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And I think that mythological story, and bear in mind, when I say myth, I don't necessarily mean that it's not true. I mean, Kumaraswamy once said that myth embodies the nearest thing to absolute truth that can be stated in words, which I think is like your daily dose of profundity. But it is true that real myths, real theological myths, are sort of designed to teach us these profound truths about what it is to be human and what we're doing here. And I think that the Garden of Eden really, really says it all. And there is within us, I think the Catholic concept of original sin is like a discrete item. Like, we don't have the time or space to unpack that. It's got a lot of doctrine and other things that surround it, which are maybe not palatable to people, but the scriptural basis for original sin isn't the idea that we're all evil and nasty and sinful and we should feel guilty or anything like that. It's just the idea that from our very origin point, pretty much the earliest possible point in human history, there's this draw to knowledge and this draw to self-awareness, which necessitates essentially a knowledge of evil. And so I keep in my mind coming back to the garden over and over again in my mind, because I think that is what it is. It's the forbidden fruit. It's the knowledge of good and evil. It's this profound test that at some point we failed, and we are forever dealing with the consequences of that failure. And the failure has led to, one could easily argue that, well, we were always meant to fail, because nothing would have happened, nothing would have changed if the forbidden fruit hadn't been taken, right? Like, humanity would have entered some kind of stasis, and it would have just been the garden forever, and nothing would have ever been possible. But even so, it is still a failure, and there is still this like huge consequence in our psyche for having to cope with that. And so, certainly not the idea that we're all like evil deep down or anything like that, but this idea that there is this deep chink in the armor, this deep crack, this deep flaw that is sort of necessitating us to deal with our shadow selves, to deal with all this sort of psychic culture of repression. And it's never has it been more beautifully, I think, symbolically represented than in this biblical story of the Garden of Eden. I think it's an amazing metaphor. The Bible is just great for writers. If you're a writer, you want to get ideas, just read the Bible. Man, I mean, it's just like a treasure trove.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to believe it if you don't want to. Like, it's not my place to say what you should or should not believe. Like, I've no interest in converting anyone or preaching to anyone, but like, just as a mine for veritable awe. It's good stuff.
It's a work of literature.
Yeah, they call it Bible studies for a reason, and highly recommend Christopher Watkins' book Biblical Critical Theory if anyone's interested. If you're like, oh, I can't read the Bible, read Christopher Watkins' book Biblical Critical Theory, because that will give you the whole. It goes through the entire Bible story, abridging obviously, but then like giving a searingly erudite sort of literary commentary on it and its tropes and its themes and how it works. And it's a masterpiece of a book. And it's given me more than a few story ideas just reading that book. But yeah, the Garden of Eden, it's like an interesting symbol, I think, of the human condition.
So that it sort of fits with you being out of the box drawn to these things, in that you think that humanity essentially is it sort of has to be this way, that
Mm.
part of our humanity is that we have this thirst for
Yeah.
knowledge outside of ourselves, and in searching for that we are going to sort of transgress
Mm.
rules and overstep boundaries.
Yeah. It's built into our DNA in a way. And Graham Hancock had a really it's not just him. He became a bit of a poster boy for it, because obviously he's got a high public profile, right? And he wrote an amazing book called Supernatural, where he basically talked about the forbidden fruit maybe being a metaphor for psychoactive drugs, and that there's basically a point in human history. We've been around for like 200,000 years, according to the sort of latest idea from the scientists, but it's only at 150,000 years that we have this sudden breakthrough, and basically civilization just happens. And there's quite a lot of people, really respectable scientists, along with journalists and other thought leaders, sort of coming around to this idea that maybe it was some kind of ayahuasca, DMT, magic mushroom, combination of all of these, but basically that these have led to transformations in consciousness, transformations in the way we think, which changes the way we behave, which therefore possibly gives birth to this sudden, really sudden change. Everything happens very slowly in evolution, so this sudden leaps forward like this sort of don't make sense. So that there's trying to make sense of it. They think that this is one possible explanation, and I think it's a really interesting one, because again, it's the forbidden fruit is metaphorical, but there are interesting literal ways to interpret it as well. And I think the other mythological example I've just thought of off the top of my head is, of course, Pandora's box, which also is a sort of Adam and Eve story of temptation, a story of, Pandora is told not to open the box. She has to safeguard it. But of course she opens it, because that's human nature. And of course the box contains all the horror of the world and all the misery and all the shame, but it also contains hope. And that's, again, it's like the forbidden fruit, which, knowledge of good and evil. There's good is in there as well. There's a price to our self-awareness. Animals are not really self-aware. They're a part of nature. They're not looking at nature as though it's a separate entity to themselves. It's like they're in their environment and they are their environment. But we've divided our consciousness. We've brought this sword blade down and said, this is separate from me. I'm an individual entity, and I'm looking, and these things are separate from me. And that primary duality is sort of the source of our power, but also the source of all our suffering as well. So
Okay.
big stuff.
Yeah, big stuff. I knew that you would have some big stuff. And in personal terms, I know that you're saying that the thirst for it was probably there from as young as you can remember. Were there any other things that developed it growing up, aside from, I know you said that Stephen King, The Stand, when you were sort of in your late teens, that was the one that sort of crystallized how you could bring the mythical and the everyday together. But do you remember any other sort of key things that you watched or read, or any life events growing up that led you to where you are now, even though you might not have realized it at the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a really good point as well, that we don't always realize at the time how significant something's going to be. We expect to feel significance, but we don't always. Sometimes humdrum things turn out to be really important. My life has been laden with supernatural occurrences, man.
Oh,
Like,
really?
oh my god, like it doesn't stop. I think a lot of people have things when they're children where they
Hmm.
feel like there could be something, and then it sort of stops once they sort of hit puberty, start dating, start doing becoming an adult, doing all these adult things. But for me, it never did. It sort of kept going, and I'm still like on this crazy journey with it. So, but as I said, I think the Stephen King thing was really significant because it helped me to understand how I could integrate it as a writer. But and that's been a form of therapy for me because when you have all these sort of supernatural experiences, it's very easy to lose your grounding.
Hmm.
And we've all met those people who are in the theater talking to themselves, cheering when people are being tortured, or one of my favorite ever places in the whole world is Glastonbury. But I'm very aware, like that there's an energy there that can carry you away if you don't have both your feet planted firmly on the ground. So and equally, by the same token, if you run away from this side of yourself, if you start going down the very rationalist, materialist route of like these things don't happen, denying your own experience, denying your own feeling state, that way also leads to madness. That leads to like psychological breakdown, and the shadows tend to rupture the fortress you've built in your mind. So it's been a really delicate balance for me of like acknowledging these supernatural things, engage, even in going so far as to like engage with them, but by the same token, being like a rational person who has a family, is hopefully very grounded, and the writing has really been that liminal intersecting point, I think, for me, of bringing those two things together in a way where they don't destroy each other, but actually alchemy can happen, and it can create something new. So, bit woo woo, but yeah, that's sort of a snapshot of my life. And I mean, if you want a supernatural story, I mean, I've
Yeah,
10
please.
or 20 10 or 20 locked and loaded, ready
Well,
to
give
go.
me one of your
Um,
early ones. One of the ones that you feel like has started to sort of shape the stream in the direction in which it's going.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's some really heavy ones, but I think like when I think I will go for the heavy one because we are talking about darkness after all, dark fiction, and this is something that like does change you forever, really. So like massive trigger warnings if you're like sensitive to like sexual abuse and kidnapping and stuff like that. But so yeah, it's like turn off now and then like maybe come back in 10 minutes time. But when I was 11, I was kidnapped, and by bizarrely a group of 16-year-old boys, and obviously the like it doesn't sound like they're that much older than me, but like the difference between a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old is like
It's massive. Yeah,
it's colossal. They were grown men to me, really.
yeah.
Um, and basically there was this. This sounds almost like a fairy tale, but I grew up in a really rough area, and there was a school which has now been closed down because it was so dreadful. But there was a wood just outside the school, and really they should have. I love nature, but they should have cut that shit down. But they didn't because they had various uses for it. They used it, for example, in a biology class. We had this crazy biology teacher called Mr. Limburn, bald-headed, like the stereotype of an evil scientist in a laboratory. Whatever you're imagining in your head is probably like fairly on the money. Like this bald domed pate, hair around the side, and these like half moon spectacles, almost like a Harry Potter character. Lab coat, always the lab coat. Like whatever situation you saw him in, even if he was outside of the school, he was wearing the damn lab coat. And but he was amazing. He was an amazing teacher. I think if I'd stayed at the school, Like, he could have made me into a biologist rather than a writer, because just his passion was so infectious. He kept pet cockroaches and he walked them on leads, and
Wow.
he had a shotgun under the desk, which obviously there was always a rumor in the school that it hadn't really been deactivated and it was actually loaded. In one lesson I was in, he did actually get it out, point it at a student, and pull the trigger when they were misbehaving. And it was like the biggest bully in the school, or in our year group at least, and he literally shat himself. Obviously, like, all of this would never
Different times.
It was a different time. It was a different time. And to be honest, like, it wasn't, obviously I'm a fairly young guy. It wasn't like that long ago. He pushed the envelope a lot, and he only got away with it because he got colossal results, and because even the students who were terrified of him sort of respected him. And he attracted students to the school. Like, he was always there on open days, walking cockroaches and doing his crazy things. And obviously kids just loved that shit. Like, so he was like a carnival clown that sort of lured you into the school. Anyway, Mr. Lindbergh, he is very important to the story I'm going to tell, because, as I say, he was one of the only teachers that anyone in the school respected. Loads of teachers ended up beaten up, stabbed. There was no order. Nobody respected the teachers, apart from Mr. Lindbergh, because he had a shotgun under the desk, right? And he was a crazy guy, and you never knew what he was going to do or say. And he used to use this wood for biology walks. We'd go out and he'd find some flower or some butterfly or something and tell us about, and it was supposed to be a like nice hands-on break from the classroom. But this wood also got to put to very nefarious purposes, like, kids go out there, smoke, do, drugs and stuff. Like, I mean, that's all fairly like harmless in real terms, but it was basically a place where anything that you didn't want to be seen happened. And one time I got taken by these 8 guys. They took me out into the woods. They beat the shit out of me. They used stones, like, clubbed me. To the point where, like, I couldn't talk, couldn't even scream. Like, my face was just like a purple football. And the leader of them, he could have been Satan himself. Like, I'll never forget his face. And he had a 3-inch Stanley knife, and he pushed me down and did all kinds of awful things. And he put the knife to my face. I still have a scar in my hairline. It's of all the injuries that they did to my face. It's really bizarre, but the scar I still have of the event is that prick of the Stanley knife in my hairline, which I think shows there's a psychological dimension to healing, right? But anyway, and he said he was going to cut my face off, and then he was going to come on whatever he found beneath. And I was like fully like, okay, well, this is it. This is the end. Like, I'm gonna die, and I'm gonna die fucking badly. And suddenly I just heard Mr. Lindbergh's voice, like, oh, fucking have you for fucking garters, like, just some cry. And they just, like, the one person who could have scared them, and they just scattered. And I'll never forget the look the leader gave me, like, as he went off. It was definitely like I'll be back to finish this, but I never saw him again. But then, this is the punchline. The person who emerged from the woods was not Mr. Lindbergh. It was my friend Rob. Rob, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. Still very close. And he had impersonated the teacher's voice. He was 12 years old. Like, he had hidden in the bushes, probably went out to smoke, because he started at about 10 years old, I think, had realised what was happening to me, and had the courage and the intellect and the skill to impersonate the one person who they would be fucking terrified of. And he came and he picked me up and he carried me to the medical bay. I limped with my arm around the shoulder like some fucking character from a war movie. And it, you know, what then happened as a school was just everything blew up, and it was investigated, and it was all crazy. And the school did manage to survive that controversy, but it didn't survive the subsequent ones. But they happened long after I left. But my friend Rob, like, and the reason that plays into the like supernatural is at the moment where the knife touched my face, you know, as I say, I had that thought of, I'm going to die here. I'm going to die really badly. And I just, like, I uttered a prayer, like, just the most sincere, genuine, no self-consciousness, self-irony, just, you know, a prayer. Like, you know, God, if you can sort me out here, if you can deliver me here, that would be really great. And then the most unlikely thing imaginable happened. And so, you know, to me, that was like a moment where it felt like I called out to the universe and the universe responded. And that was life-changing. So although that was a super dark story, and I am sorry if it was too distressing for anyone to hear, but, you know, for me, I tell it because it's like actually a hopeful story for me. Like in the very worst moment, like someone was listening. And obviously, you know, I'm very lucky to have an amazing friend, Rob, but, you know, the series of circumstances that put him there are quite extraordinary. And so, yeah, that's an early, you know, 11 years old, life-changing moment where firstly I came face to face with like real nasty fucking evil, real evil, and pointless evil as well. Like, evil always does seem to be completely pointless. You know, we in our films we have villains who like are doing things for power or for this or for that, but like this was like an evil that had no reason for doing what it was doing other than maybe pleasure. But
Yeah,
even
for the
then,
fun of
like
it.
for the fun of it, yeah,
Mm.
for the fun of feeling powerful, perhaps. Um, you know, but that was defeated by like a superior force of good, which was just, you know, an incredible revelation for my broken 11-year-old self. So weirdly, you know, although that's like hugely traumatic, I don't talk as if I'm a trauma victim, and I don't necessarily view myself as having been traumatized, because actually my conclusion from that experience is like an uplifting one. And I think to tie this all back into the writing and the fiction, you know, like darkness exists, I think, in fiction because it more, you know, the black backdrop of night shows the stars shining more brightly. It is a method and a journey towards that light, and we can't know the light truly without darkness. You know, you can't know what good is if you haven't faced evil. It sounds corny, but I think it's really true. And so, yeah, for me, dark fiction is a way of exploring that. And my favorite horror novels, my favorite dark fantasy novels, are novels that are not just like pointlessly nihilistic, but actually show that light in the face of that darkness. And it doesn't necessarily mean the light wins every time, but there is a yin yang mix of the two that is being explored. So that's my story, bro.
Yeah, wow,
And
I wasn't expecting that. But
no,
Jesus. Obviously, glad you came through it, and glad that you seem good. Having come through something like that, like you said, it's one
thank you.
thing to go through something traumatic, it's another thing to remain traumatized by it. So,
Yeah,
congratulations on whatever you've done to sort of emotionally get past that.
oh, well, thank you. But obviously, you know, it's not me, it's all the people I've had around me, and I've always been really blessed with amazing friends, amazing family. So and the writing as well is a mechanism to deal with this sort of stuff.
Of course.
So yeah, I often joke, like, I've heard writers sometimes in the past be like, oh, if my next book doesn't take off, I'll stop. And I'm like, You have the option of stopping. I don't have that option. the compulsion the compulsion demands it be satiated. I have to keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah, even if I'm living in a wooden shack in the woods, I think I'll still be penning manuscripts, in my own blood or squid ink or whatever. I think
This
it's
is cheap.
yeah,
No.
and it will replenish. So.
Yeah, well, ever sustaining. So it's interesting that, I mean, I get the sense. I mean, I'm only on episode 2, but having spoken to a decent number of authors just throughout writing,
Mm.
it's so interesting that this attraction to the darkness can come from maybe a place like yours, where someone has been through something truly dark, or from having had quite a light life, a light background, but still just having a fascination, maybe just for the sake of contrast towards something like that. So
Yeah.
it's really, really interesting to me at the diversity of things that bring us like
Yeah.
in the sort of same direction. So
That,
given, go on, sorry.
oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that's a really interesting point because, yeah, it's not the case that every horror author has a story like that
No,
at all. But yet we are still drawn to that side of things. For me, it's very cathartic, but I think it's cathartic for other people too, even if they haven't had that kind of experience.
yeah,
Um,
no, I agree. So given that it sounds like, I mean, I know you said there's one of 20 stories, and I hope for your sake there aren't any other dark ones like that. But
no.
given that, is there anything that's too dark for you? I mean, I've read a few pieces of your work, and you go to some pretty bleak places.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything like of your own ideas where you've been like, no, no, it's too much, or where you've been reading or watching somebody else's work and you've been like, no, not now, or maybe never?
That's a really good question. So I'd say there's two genres of horror that absolutely scare me shitless. That are like like as I say, considering I've been like pretty inoculated to horror. I remember when my wife was giving birth, there was an issue, the doctor couldn't come, I had to help the midwife, and she was like, "Oh, you're not squeamish, are you?" I was like, "Seriously, like I, you know, I don't have any kind of squeamishness at all. Like I can get stuck in." And then at the end, she was like, lots of guys say that to me, but you actually really didn't, did you? Like you were just. And it was just like, it's just gore and bodily fluids and and stuff. Like my wife is the one actually going through the
Yeah,
the shit. So I'm not very squeamish yet. There are two genres of horror that completely fuck me up, and there's one genre of horror, a third genre of horror that I actively dislike intensely.
okay,
And then in terms of my own work, there have been a couple of times I've walked, I think, too close to the darkness, and I maybe, if I was writing them now, would change them. I don't tend to rewrite old books. I've done it a couple of times for very specific reasons, but I tend to be like, that was where I was then. I need to keep moving forward, and I'd much rather write a new thing with what I've learned than go back and fix that old thing.
yeah.
Yeah, I that's very much my philosophy when I'm working. So yeah, that's a sort of general answer to your question.
So what are the two genres that get you, and what's the one that you're like, no?
Um, so I'll start with the one that I'm just like no, and then we can have the fun part of the two that really shit me up. But the one that I'm just can't stand, I call it nasty horror. It's not like an official genre, but it's like things like a Serbian film and things like that. To me, it is, as I say, nasty. It's like pointlessly dark. It's like one of those edgelordy 12-year-olds being like how many bad, like awful things can I compound, in one story. And as I say, for me, I like my darkness to have a point. if you're somebody who really likes that stuff, like fair play to you. It's not my place to judge anyone really if they like that or not. But like it doesn't do it for me. I guess
Hmm.
I like, I think something like True Detective is fantastic because the first season of True Detective goes like to the very nadir. It's about like pedophile ring, and it's so jet black, nihilistic, some real, but like all of that is justified by the amazing transformation at the end. A lot of people forget that it ends on a really positive note, and they quote Rust Cole and all his atheist statements, forgetting that like here's a massive like Christian revelation at the end. But like such is the way. It's the same with like Dante's Divine Comedy, right? We all remember the Inferno more than we remember Purgatory and Paradise. But yeah, that really, really nasty type of horror, um, to me, doesn't do it. But in terms
Hmm.
of the horror that shits me up, carnival horror is like just seems to strike some really deep vein of like uncanny valley of like the like Rob Zombie like House of a Thousand Corpses is like I can't even I couldn't watch 5 minutes, like I'd have to turn it off because it's just
Right.
so deep in the horror, and I don't really know why. Like I've had like a couple of like mildly scary carnival experiences, but nothing major. So I don't really know where this carnival horror has come from, but
Hmm.
it's there. And the other one is Aliens, man.
Right.
Something about like I've got Jordan Peele's Nope on my shelf, and I keep meaning to watch it, but I just know it's going to completely destroy me. Um, I just can't bring myself to do it. So
Uh-huh.
there's something about like alien abduction. Maybe that does sort of connect to my experience, like as a kid. I don't know, but
Hmm.
something about it goes like really deep into the horror for me. So I'm fascinated by it. I read like quite a lot of books about conspiracy theories and extraterrestrials and stuff. I find it really like it's again great fuel for writing material. Um, but in terms of like watching it on screen, I'm really like struggle with it, and I don't tend to read fiction in that genre because
Hmm.
it's just a bit difficult for me.
Did you steer clear of the X-Files back in the day?
Yeah, you see, I've never seen the X-Files.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the X-Files had some great sort of they sort of have this overarching story that became more apparent as the seasons went on about like this big alien conspiracy. But they had some great sort of monster episodes, shapeshifter. They've got loads of good episodes in the earlier series that aren't extraterrestrial. But yeah, it may or may not be your bag. You might want to select episodes carefully.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it looks really
oh.
good. It has a lot that would draw me to it for sure.
Mhm.
But yeah, there is that the constant threat of being probed. It's just there.
We all live with it. Um, so, moving on to some of the questions that I just like to ask to sort of bring some levity to our episodes.
I'm sorry,
And this
mate.
is no, 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 no. This is for all of this stuff because we can get really into the weeds with it, right? Um, I want you to name three of your favourite dark antagonists from fiction, from film, from wherever you want, really.
Great question. Really difficult. That's like an infuriatingly difficult question. One of them will seem on the surface to be quite predictable, but specifically book Sauron. Like
Okay.
Sauron in the Lord of the Rings. Like I love the films. I think it's a phenomenal adaptation. I think they did so much right. I'm a fan of the film and the books. Love them both. But one of the things that the film did, I think, lose and where it almost had to sacrifice it because there's already so much going on, was Sauron. Really, he's so much more interesting in the book. He's not just a big flaming eye. he actually has a body for a
Okay.
start, and there's a lot more in the books of like paralleling Frodo and Sauron. And by the end, Sauron has 9 fingers on his hand because one of his fingers was cut off, of course. And like by the end of the story, Frodo is called Frodo Nine Fingers.
Right.
And Frodo's parents died in very suspect and mysterious circumstances, like possibly a murder-suicide. It's never explicitly stated, but Sauron has had this rupture with Morgoth that sort of left him broken. Like it's like really weird, but it I guess you couldn't do it in a film in a convincing way. But Sauron in the book is a fascinating character in his own right, and his obsession and his desire is such that the way people perceive him when they're perceiving in a spiritual way, like via the Palantir or in a dream or something like that, is he's represented by an eye, because there's no better symbol for desire, right? The eye that is just constantly looking. But that's like metaphorical. So that sort of subtlety is slightly lost in the film. So anyway, rambling on, but like book Sauron is a fascinating character. There's a character called Randall Jaff in the Clive Barker The Art series,
Okay.
particularly in The Great and Secret Show. He is fascinating. He's like one of those villains who sort of goes on a redemption arc. It takes a long time for the turn to happen, but like he's also fascinating. Similarly to Sauron, a man who's like consumed by a specific desire, and that desire drives him steadily deeper and deeper down a rabbit hole that has no bottom. A really compelling antagonist. And yeah, some of the like early scenes with him I'll just never forget. They're like imprinted on my brain indelibly, And then a third one. I mean, like, I'm tempted to go to the film for the last one. I mean, original Vader obviously is like up there. Like, it leaves such an impression upon a young mind, But obviously they've like everything released after the original trilogy is like slowly diluted him. But like that, the original Vader and all that was like implied, like there's so many like poor decisions that undermine his character. Like, for example, like Vader is really old in the original trilogy, and we get the sense that the reason he's like so mechanical is like over these decades and decades and decades, maybe even longer, because we don't know how long Jedi live. Like, he's had to replace bits of himself. Not that like one time Obi-Wan cut off like all of his limbs in one like spinny flourish, but like that this is a long thing, He's been doing this all this time and slowly dehumanized by this process. The way that he has a split personality, basically. Like, I believe he's the son of Anakin Skywalker, and he's like talking about himself. He's like so divorced himself from that other side. Most of us in the modern world divorce ourselves from our shadow self. We're like, I'm not that guy over there. He's divorcing himself from the other side. Like, that's just like really fascinating. So yeah, like original trilogy Vader, I think, has to get a mention. And even though I do feel like he's been massively diluted by a lot of stuff that came after, there's something about that original incarnation of him that was just so compelling. And then, of course, and again, he goes on an incredible redemption arc. That ending to Return of the Jedi blew my tiny mind when I first saw it. Like what? Luke doesn't kill the Emperor? Like, it's not just like a straight up like 1v1, like Vader like turns. And I think that connects to something actually really interesting that Clive Barker once said. He said that all epics have only room for 3 players, and this is in the opening of Imagica. Um, and that's like all my favorite stories always have that three players at the end, like Vader, Luke, and the Emperor, Gollum, Frodo, and Sam, and then like let's go to an indie author like Brian Bowyer, the ending where there's like this showdown and there's three, and the good, the bad, the ugly. Like there's something about that, a force of good and a force of evil, and then there's some middle force that is neither good nor evil, that is not, but not even just grey, because grey is like dull. It's almost like they're both good and evil simultaneously, and that's the element of like chaos that you don't know which direction that element is going to go, and that creates like fascinating fiction. So yeah, long rambling answer, but OG Vader,
Book
Randall Jaff,
Sauron, Randall,
Randall Jaff, no,
Randall
Randolph
Jaff,
Jaff, and
Randolph Jaff.
then Sauron, book Sauron. Yeah.
So you may be aware of the little game that I played with Lee on the last episode.
Yeah.
It's my version of Snog, Marry, Avoid, and it's called Stalk, Bury, Destroy. So to lay out the sort of rationale to people who didn't listen to the last time, I want you to pick, based on their characteristics, who out of those characters you would preferably stalk. So maybe they're the most interesting of the characters. You would like to see how they go about their business, maybe how they came to be that way in the first place. But essentially, you would like them to continue on as they are doing their evil deeds. Then we've got Berry. So this character, you would like to put an end to. You would like to kill them because they are pure evil, but they have enough redeeming qualities to give them a proper burial and give them some respect.
Oh, I see. Respect.
There are remains. Yeah, it's a respect thing. And then our third option is to destroy, which means to completely obliterate, to annihilate from all existence. They're too bad. They've got to go and go completely without a trace. So, who would you stalk out of those three?
I mean, I think Sauron, actually, because Sauron, you could learn how to make cool shiny things.
And who doesn't like cool shiny things?
Cool shiny, like you could learn some shit watching Sauron, right? You could learn how to forge magical rings and cool weapons and stuff. Like he's a master blacksmith. So yeah, I think I would stalk Sauron, even though he's palpably probably the most powerful and evil of the three. I would stalk him because I could glean knowledge from him.
So you would be like this hovering eye, watching his eye.
His eye.
Yeah.
It's very meta, yeah.
Uh-huh. So what about burying? Who would you bury?
That's tough. I respect both Randall Jaff and Vader, which is probably something I shouldn't say out loud. I think possibly Vader, like, but if we're talking like including the prequels, like he is like just like a child killer, which is sort of so much lamer than you know, like that's a destroy. That's a like, no, you don't need to exist. But like cool samurai warrior who's been like hunting Jedi down for decades, like that's, you cremate that guy, right, with a moving John Williams soundtrack. So I think yeah, if it's wrong of me to like divorce Vader from the complete canon. So I guess I'm gonna actually bury the Jaff, because the Jaff has courage. That's one of the really cool things about him as a villain, and one of the things that makes him quite compelling in the Great and Secret Show is like he's not a coward, and he puts himself time and again into massive danger to accomplish his goals, and he does have goals. It's not just like chaos for the sake of chaos. And then when things get out of control, he does try to rectify things, and again is courageous. Like he puts himself in the fire. So I think like the Jaff deserves a burial. I think they actually do bury him in the book as well. So spoiler alert, sorry, but Yeah, the Jaff gets a burial, which I guess leaves our destroy option.
Yeah, that's
Vader,
gotta
the
go.
Vader. Sorry, mate, but the younglings really means you have to be destroyed now. So
Yeah, you shouldn't have done those other films.
you shouldn't
Really,
have
that's a
agreed.
sin. Yeah,
Yeah,
gotta be
yeah.
careful with your image rights.
You really do. He is one of the most overused characters. Like all the comics, which I did at one point, I was like quite into, and then the games, and then the Vader has 16 minutes of screen time in A New Hope, and it is enough. It is more than enough. Like the impact he leaves is colossal, and then again, Empire Strikes Back. Like he's more developed in that film, but it's a colossal impact. But like the more you get of a character like that, who is one of Vader's characteristics that they've all just forgotten about is he has like a real facility for language, which is why casting whiny Hayden Christensen was like really actually I put some respect on his name. He had a very difficult job to do, a very difficult script to work with, and like he gave it what he could give it. And like I don't hate the guy, like he seems like a really nice guy, but like casting him and writing the script in the way they did is really odd because Vader has like a real gift for humor and like poetry, which like is one of the again things that makes him like cool as a villain. Like apology accepted, Captain Needa, as he's like flushed out the airlock. You know, like there's a sort of class to him. You know, which is at odds with this angsty teenager, and so yeah, but the more times they use Vader, the more different writers who are not the original writers are writing him, and the more it is this process of like the more he talks, the worse it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And cleverly in Rogue One, they kept his dialogue to an absolute minimum, and mainly he just stalked about and cut people in half, and that was really a much better use of him than I've seen. But even then, I still think like we don't always need to see him. Like he's overused, and if you're writing a big long writing, if you're a writer like listening to this, don't overuse your cool villains. Like keep them back a bit, and then they really make an
Mm-hmm.
impact when they do arrive.
Mm-hmm. Just
Yeah.
a shout out to Hayden Christensen. Not that he's listening. An absolutely terrifying thriller that he's in called Awake. Have you seen it?
No.
Where he undergoes a heart surgery and gets anaesthetized, but is fully conscious
Oh God.
whilst undergoing the surgery. It is horrifying. Yeah, so recommendation there.
Well, medical horror is a third place runner up, I think, to my two unendurable horrors.
Okay.
I was already quite woo, as you know, but certainly my fear of medical procedures has assisted that in the seeking of alternative like medicine modalities for sure. It's like I don't really want to go to the hospital. Bad things tend to happen there, like which is not true at all. But there's something there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my upcoming book, it sort of has elements of medical thriller. I would say
Mm.
it's probably most firmly in the psychological thriller category, but you'll see soon enough.
You'll see soon enough, Joe, when
You'll
I
see soon enough.
see
As
with
in
a
the next
gibbering
few
rep.
weeks. It's not a threat. So just one more silly question before I move on to a few audience questions. If you were going to be any sort of dark antagonist, any class of dark antagonist, what sort would you be?
Oh, I think it's got to be a wizard.
A wizard?
I mean, I already am an evil antagonist. I mean, this should be very clear by now. I've got my origin story and ready to go. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the very keen-eyed among your viewers will have discerned some quite interesting books on my on the shelf behind me. I'm fascinated by the occult, and I think evil wizards are underrated and definitely a really, like an evil wizard can be many things, and they
Hmm.
can be a center of power. They can be powerful in themselves, but they can also exert great influence over other people, and they can command armies, and also they can do like sort of miraculous and wondrous things, even though they may be evil. Like Sauron, they can forge the One Ring and the Elven Rings, and they can do interesting stuff. So like an evil mad genius type wizard, I think is where I would be for sure. Not a berserk madman or a serial killer or anything like that. I think I would go evil wizard.
Interesting. I like that as an answer. That's left field. I'd not even considered that as an option, but I like it
What
very
were you
much.
thinking in terms of options? What were you?
I don't know, like you say, serial killers and werewolves and ghosts and demons, so
For
yeah,
an evil wizard, you can be all of those
psychopaths.
things, right?
I guess you could, yeah. Yeah, they're not exclusive categories, I guess. I'm
Yeah,
learning
yeah.
as I go.
You could be a werewolf
Um,
serial killer. That would be that would be
but is
something.
that a serial killer who is a werewolf or a serial killer who targets werewolves?
Oh wow. Both are an excellent premise for a story. Why not have? Oh my god, you could have
Like the
both in a
Dexter of
story.
werewolves.
Yeah, like a guy who like kills only werewolves, but then there is a werewolf who is also a serial killer, and so then their two paths cross. Like I,
Hmm.
I, I don't know, spitballing. That could be a TV series, couldn't it?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, werewolves were massive a few years ago, weren't they? So maybe we
Yeah.
can bring them back.
Just need a guy with suitable pectorals to carry the lead role. That's all you need.
Hey, Michael J. Fox did a decent werewolf back in the 80s. Well, the pecs, I'll have you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But did you ever see Teen Wolf?
Team one.
Teen Wolf.
T Wolf, no.
No, he was like a high school werewolf.
That's I've never heard of this.
No,
This is amazing.
it's like a sort of 80s family comedic. It's not a scary one. But yeah, Michael J. Fox, some of his finest work. Um,
He will be remembered
take that.
forever.
Yeah, take that however you will. So I've got a few audience questions that people have asked of you. I'll start with one from Thomas, who's asked, "What are the things that you don't do because they would hinder your writing?"
That's a great question, Thomas.
Mm.
Thank you. I think actually what Thomas has really hit on something really interesting that um, is just a general. I know you're not the biggest fan of self-help, but one concept in the self-help world, which I think is very valid and very true, is often when people are thinking about success, they think, "What do I need to do to be successful?" But I've really found that it is almost more about what you stop doing
Mhm.
than actually what you start. If you start stripping away the noise and the chaff and the time wasting and the things that drain your energy and diffuse your focus, if you actually start cutting that stuff away, so success starts to just happen in and of itself. It's less about what you do and more about what you don't do. So writing, I think, is really the same. um you know Not necessarily even not doing things, but certainly moderating things is really important. One big thing I think is I don't watch much TV. I'm not trying to sound like, oh, I don't watch TV. I'm like, so, I love watching a good program, but I choose a program to watch and I watch that program. With a baby, I don't watch anything at all, but that's a different situation. But in terms of like, if that you don't have that, picking something to watch and watching it is meaningful. It's got intent. I'm watching this. I'm engaged with it. I want to see what happens. I want to see what I can learn from it. Whereas just having the TV on
Hmm.
is, I think, where things start to go wrong, and 1 hour turns into 2, into 3, into 4, and then your whole evening's gone. And then suddenly, most people are working 9 to 5 jobs. I'm really lucky. I now work for myself and I write and edit full time. But when I had a job, you come home at 5 or 6 and you are tired, and you do just want to stick the TV on. But if you can strike that balance between looking after yourself and nourishing yourself and being productive in the evenings, then you will feel so much better about yourself. And actually, writing, I find, energizes me, in terms of, there's like different types of energy, right? There's like physical exhaustion. It is actually physically tiring to write. I don't know if you find that, but I certainly do. But it's emotionally and spiritually energizing. If I've written in a day, I think, wow, I've achieved something today. I feel like, wired from it, a little bit high from it almost. It is, and it's like a natural high, that feeling of creativity and productivity. So yeah, I haven't really specifically answered. I've said TV, which I guess is like a fairly generic answer in a way, but I think it's more about, it's not even necessarily about what you cut out or stop doing, but it is about doing things with intent.
Hmm.
And from that point, things start to flow. Certainly, one thing in order to do writing is you do have to prioritize it. So I guess what you stop doing is you stop putting other things first before the writing. You have to be a bit, I guess, egomaniacal about it. You have to say, I'm committed to this thing. But the way I always view it is that I am a much better person when I'm writing. When I stop writing, I stop processing a lot of these things that we've talked about earlier in the call. I stop feeling creative. I stop feeling, like productive. Not that I think, oh, you have to be productive. You can just be, and that's another self-help thing that I think actually has a lot of validity. You're not only valuable because you're productive, but fundamentally, I think human beings, we are actually driven to be productive. And again, in the Garden of Eden, be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful. Okay, yeah, you can interpret it literally as have kids, but actually just be fruitful. Look at the bees. Look how happy they are, absolutely fucking loving life, just making as much fucking honey as they can. Like, that's the happy and natural state. We've all met that person who has not worked in a really long time. They've not had any structure in their day. And, things start to go kind of wrong when we don't have this, this productivity. Even it doesn't have to be a job productivity or working productivity, but just something you're passionate about and committed to. So yeah, for me, stop putting other things in front of the writing would be my second answer to that question. You have to really say it's the number one priority, and in doing that, you will facilitate your family, you'll facilitate your friends, you'll facilitate all your relationships, you'll facilitate your career. I mean, I could cope with the jobs I was doing before I worked for myself through writing. I was a better employee as well. Because I had this outlet, because I had this feeling of self-worth and all this really important stuff as a result of doing the writing. So yeah, like automatic TV, I think is one thing, and putting other things before the writing is another.
Hmm.
If that's not too generic.
No, no, not at all. I have I have two questions from our resident troll, who is a friend of mine. Um, given,
every channel
given that,
needs one.
yeah, yeah. So, given that you're a dark fantasy author, he has asked what your deepest, darkest sexual fantasy is. I'm not going to ask you that, but I am going to direct him to your short story that I read called Mallard's Maze. Maybe that'll give him some insights. Um, so yeah, Jim, you can go and dig that out of its anthology.
I got
Um,
I got known for that story.
did you really?
It I won't say because I don't want to spoil the surprise.
No.
But there was a nickname that was given to me off the back of that story, and there are some people in the sort of horror extreme splatterpunk extreme horror community who still refer to me by that nickname. I've never quite lived down that story, so that's really funny that you brought. I did not expect you to bring up that story.
I didn't expect to be asked that question by the audience, but with Jim in the audience, I should never put anything off the table. I will wrap this up now by, I know that I don't think I really framed this podcast apart from saying the title, the sort of premise that I came up with for this podcast is like asking, well, what the fuck is wrong with us? Like, why are we drawn to these sorts of stories? And I realised that maybe there's nothing wrong with us at all, but there may well be. And I know that we've done a bit of an examination of your past and what's brought you to these points. So I want you to sum up before we go in one sentence what the fuck is wrong with you that you create these stories.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a bold ask. And one sentence. What the fuck is wrong with me? Oh, that's the kind of negative self-talk, that I don't need in my life. Those kind of low vibes, man. What the fuck?
I'm bringing you down into the gutter with me.
I tell you what, I won't do one sentence. I'll do one word. Desire. And I'll say it like Pinhead. Desire. Yeah, that is what the fuck is wrong with me.
I think that's a remark on what is maybe wrong with humanity going back to the Garden of Eden.
Certainly, that is what Buddha would say.
So, can you let everybody know where they can find you, your work?
Very kind. Yeah, I am on Twitter. How much longer Twitter will exist, we don't know, but I'm on it for now, at Joseph Wordsmith. I have a website, which is themindflayer.com. And on that site, you can drop me a line. You can get a free ebook novella from me called Angel of Dark Mercy, which is great little story, and it's the first sort of book in the sequence of Thrice Dead. So it's a really good example of my work. Like if you don't like it, then I'm probably not for you, but if you do, then great. There's plenty more where that came from, so it's a good way to test for free if you like my work. So yeah, themindflayer.com is my website. That's probably the best place to find me. But I am on Twitter as well. I have a YouTube channel, but I don't upload to it very often because it's quite hard to do video editing now I'm a dad, and like soundproof rooms, quite an investment, and so yeah, recording's quite difficult, but I got lucky today with the way our schedules work. But I do have a YouTube channel as well, which is just Joseph Sale, and I upload sort of videos that explore magic and occult ideas, which are quite, as I've said, I'm quite fascinated by and quite central to my work and my sort of way of thinking about things. So yeah, three locations you can find me, and obviously all my books are on Amazon as per usual. That we have to acknowledge the great beast and appease it in order to continue with our literary career.
Sound like Sauron.
Who knows? He was known for his industry, after all. Very productive place, Mordor.
Oh, mate, thank you for joining me. It's been a good chat, and thank you for sharing. You went into the depths to share something that I wasn't expecting. So I hope I received it well.
Yeah.
But yeah, No, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to talk to you too, Arton. I love this channel, and I think it's such an amazing premise, and I can't wait to see who else you get on here. And yeah, you're a very compassionate listener. So thanks for letting me come on and drop that absolute fucking bombshell. And for listening to me rabbit on about villains and stuff. It's amazing questions. It's been a great time.
No, thank you. And thank you to everybody who's watched and listened. We'll be back with another episode soon. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Cheers.